Parents with no criminal record, get arrested and detained by ICE. The daughter of a couple deported with no criminal record says they were transported like animals. Stephanie Gonzalez says she and her family have endured heartbreak since the deportation of her parents, 55-year-old Gladys and 59-year-old Nelson Gonzalez. There they are looking at the sunset. Well, this is anything but sunny behavior. They realized they really didn't deserve to be treated as criminals. Stephanie Gonzalez, age 27, told ABC News on Wednesday, describing how she and her sisters, 23-year-old Gabriella, 33-year-old Jessica, have been devastated as their parents, who possess no criminal records, have lived in the United States for 35 years, have been transported like animals and placed in inhumane conditions. ABC News with the reporting. Stephanie Gonzalez said her parents were arrested. They were detained February 21st after a routine supervision appointment. That day, Gladys Gonzalez was initially granted a 1-year extension to stay in America, prompting her daughter to think that, quote, everything's gonna be fine, like it always is. A few hours later, however, Nelson Gonzalez called to inform the family he was being detained by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and that Gladys's extension was revoked and she was being detained as well. They separated them, separate rooms. They were in rooms alone for hours with no food, Stephanie Gonzalez said. They had handcuffed them from their hands or from their wrists and from their ankles. She added that it is jarring for her parents to be treated like criminals, especially since they had never, ever been in trouble with the law. ICE confirmed the couple has been deported to Colombia. ICE confirmed to ABC News that Gladys and Nelson Gonzalez do not have criminal records and have been deported to Colombia. Stephanie Gonzalez said her parents were transported to detention facilities in different states without knowing where they were going and that she and her sisters had no way of tracking them, calling it a mess. A mess by design is what I'm gonna call it. It's not an administrative error, it's a mess by design. It baffles my mind how they're treating people this way, she said, adding that it's so cruel that they were literally moving them around like animals. Stephanie Gonzalez also said her parents had no way of finding each other while in custody. They just happened to be on the same plane back to Colombia. If you wrote me a movie script and I was a studio head in Hollywood, I'd reject it. Say this is just not plausible. So just go back, refine it. Now we could say, which documentary is this? Is this a true story? It's happening again and again and again. We might say, can you make it even somehow? Your imagination is not as good as the administration, apparently. Nelson and Gladys Gonzalez came to America in 1989. They were seeking asylum from violence in Colombia, their daughter said. She says they then faced multiple fraudulent attorneys, including one who ended up disbarred, which ended up preventing the proper citizenship paperwork to be filed. I can see how that could happen. A lot of people who are seeking a better way of life are taken advantage of by those who are trying to fleece them or leverage fear. An ICE spokesperson said in a statement that Nelson and Gladys Gonzalez illegally entered the United States in 1989 after they appeared before an immigration judge who found no legal basis for them to remain in the US. ICE said the couple was granted a voluntary departure with a final removal in 2000. Stephanie Gonzalez confirmed that her parents were faced with a voluntary deportation day in 2000, but she added that they subsequently spent over 20 years filing appeals. Though her parents' cases were closed in 2021, Stephanie Gonzalez said they were instructed simply to continue showing up to their supervision appointments and check in with the appropriate authorities. During these supervision visits, Nelson and Gladys Gonzalez consistently got approved to stay in the US, though the time frame almost always varied, she continued. Stephanie Gonzalez and her sister started a GoFundMe page. It has raised over $75,000. There's no shortage of stories of these unjust deportations. ICE admits to an administrative error after a Maryland man sent to El Salvador prison. that hell prison by design. Maryland man with protected legal status was sent to the notorious prison in El Salvador following an administrative error. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement official admitted in a sworn declaration on Monday. Kilmer Armando Abrego Garcia, who has a U.S. citizen wife, 5-year-old child, is currently at CICOT, the notorious prison in El Salvador. Finally, as part of a new lawsuit filed by Abrego Garcia's attorneys, who are requesting that the government of El Salvador return him to the US after being sent there because of an administrative error. Willful misconduct, by the way, I believe they make a lot of mistakes, but willful misconduct is not an error. It's willful misconduct. This is intentional. If you don't care who you're sweeping up, it's not an error, intentional. Abrego Garcia's attorney said he is not a member or has no affiliation with the Tren de Aragua MS-13 or any other criminal or street gang, and said that the US government has never produced an iota of evidence to support this unfounded accusation. Can we pause there too? Because if they had the documentation that would send shockwaves through the American public and Karens everywhere and suburban soccer mobs, believe me, they would bring the receipts. They'd have press conferences. You know when they print it up on those big whiteboards and the media zooms in and then the officials step before the platform, there's usually a gang of them. They introduce themselves, they spell their names so you can get it right in the paper or on the screen. And then they say, this is what they did. They plucked the fingernails apart and they did this, they murdered, they maimed, they did that. How come we're not, where's the receipts, please? Okay, pause is over. The pause is over. In response to the error, government has acknowledged the error, but said in a filing that because Abrego Garcia is no longer in US custody, the court cannot order him to be returned to the US, nor can the court order El Salvador to return him. They think they're cute, yes. And it's so gross to me, that you're playing this game. And it also shows the enormous, not just disrespect, but disregard for the judiciary. Again, who gonna check me, boo? Can you imagine going into a court and saying, well, I got in the wrong car, I drove off and crashed it, but the car's gone now. And then you just walk out and go have lunch. Mm-hmm. But you got in the wrong car and you crashed it. I don't know, let's pretend an electric car, people leave them on too often because you can't tell when it's off. I just did it, okay? You got in that car, you crashed it, and now you're acting like, oh, well. Mm-hmm. It's just so sick to me. Is it just me?
No, it's not just you. I think a lot of people feel the way that you're feeling, including myself. Look, even Joe Rogan is speaking out about how inhumane and unconstitutional and incompetent these deportations are. Like you just told us, we heard the one story, then there was the other story about someone being wrongfully deported to El Salvador with no trial because of a clerical error. Joe Rogan said that, no one thinks that dangerous gang members should be allowed to stay in this country. And sure, perhaps we can all agree on that. But the people being deported right now are often presumed gang members or criminals. And the only reason why they're presumed to be is because there have been no trials. There is no due process. It is un-American. And, with this administration, they always have to have a boogeyman, right? They can say there is widespread gang violence in this country and we have to do something about it right now, to the point that the American people say, we have to do something about it right now. Not only is all of this very embarrassing and it's just like, it looks like no one knows what is going on, right? The people in charge are dumb or they're evil or both, right? Mm-hmm. They don't know how to execute a plan in a way that makes sense. I understand that with anything, there's going to be bungles along the road. And as you're trying to roll out any kind of plan, especially a plan like this one that is intended to be executed over a very wide and ill-defined area, very, very quickly. But this plan was flawed from the beginning because, as I said, it is ill-defined, right? They never really said what they were actually going after. Their boogeyman was always a boogeyman for a political fodder, right? It wasn't actually backed up with any kind of data. And if it was very weak data. But to your earlier point, the only reason why this administration is getting away with this is the same reason why they get away with most of what they do, because they don't have anyone holding them accountable. They only have enablers. They only have a public bevy of supporters who think that due process is basically just bureaucracy, which they were also told to hate by people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump, right? Bureaucracy, it slows down the execution of justice rather than protects justice. And they've been led to believe that these issues affecting this country regarding immigration specifically are so dangerous and so pressing and so acute that we cannot afford to waste a single minute on things like due process. Who can be bothered with humanity and slow legality when Americans are actively being terrorized, even that, we haven't really seen evidence that Americans are being quote unquote terrorized like we're being told.
Yeah, it's just so awful. We've got to rush people out of here. We'll ask questions later. That's how bad it is. Okay. And then in another case, they say the opposite. It's sicko behavior. It's consequential behavior. It's not sustainable behavior. This is not sustainable, folks. You lied, which we're accustomed to. You said only the worst, we're going to be kicked out of here. This is why it's important to remember we exist in a community. We breathe the same air. You want to smoke? You want to use hairspray? Go ahead. But it has consequences for other people too. That's all. I don't know. I'm not even telling you what to do about it. I'm just telling you that's what a community is, a global community even. We all exist and do this dance together, and it's not sustainable this way.